Go for it.
Hi, I am Joey. I'm part of the Arbutus ARME, and this is the Tree Hugger podcast.
Hi, I'm Marianne, and I am part of the Arbutus ARME, and this is the Tree Hugger podcast.
Hey, I'm Michael Yadrick. I am broadcasting on Puyallup territory, now known as Grit City, Tacoma, Washington. Tree Hugger Podcast is back again, where we discuss how Pacific Madrone is going to save our lives. I'm going on a deep dive into Arbutus menziesii, the Pacific Madrone. Anyone who is familiar with me will know I take any opportunity to talk about madrones, even at inappropriate times where it makes little sense to mention them. The Pacific Madrone is the largest species in the family Ericaceae. I think it is the most unique tree found in Cascadia. Its range is fully the western edge of Turtle Island, which is now California, Oregon, and Washington, and into southwest British Columbia. It is a broadleaf-evergreen and is rarely dominant in our forests, but indicative of very interesting plant communities. My guests on this episode are the core team of the Arbutus ARME. We're going to chat a bit, then I am bringing you a recording of me presenting at a Tacoma Tree Foundation Growing Skills webinar about the madrone from January 28th, 2021. Big thanks to Tacoma Tree Foundation for making space to highlight the relationship we have with madrone and building the skills required to help ensure we have a future for the species. If you all remember or want to acquaint yourself with the foundation, there's a Tree Hugger episode with Sarah Lowe, the executive director, called Care for Urban Trees and Each Other that I put out just about a year ago when the COVID pandemic was escalating. The foundation is improving community health and well-being through social inclusion, cohesion, and capital building to restore urban trees and green space in the greater Tacoma area, Pierce County, and the watersheds of Puget Sound. So here with me right now is the core team of the Arbutus ARME. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Marianne Elliott. She is known as one of the few experts on the species. I might refer to her as the madrone whisperer. Marianne is a plant pathologist with Washington State University Plant Pathology Program. She has a special history with madrone research and is co-founder of Arbutus ARME. Marianne plays a key role in identifying madrone diseases and encouraging madrone research and collaboration. How's it going, Marianne?
It's going good.
All right. Thanks for being here. And then I want to introduce Joey. Joey joined the Wazoo Ornamental Plant Pathology Program at the Washington State University Research and Extension Center in Puyallup as a postdoctoral fellow funded by the United States Department of Agriculture. He recently returned to the Pacific Northwest after spending 4 years in South Africa leading Cape Citizen Science. How's it going, Joey?
So good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So a little background, Marianne and I have tried to record this episode or some version of this episode twice. Once was about November of 2019 was the date on the script I just looked at. And I pretty much a novice podcast mistake, which was I recorded my audio on the laptop microphone. And so just characteristic of a lot of Tree Hugger podcasts, I had some sort of audio issue challenge. So this one is going to be the one. This is going to be the one. One other thing is a little over 2 years ago, I called Marianne after I made a trip to a basement library at the University of Washington to peruse the archives about this group that funded local madrone research in Seattle in the late 1990s. Much of what we now know locally about the tree came out of this now defunct group called Save Magnolia's Madrones. So that phone call led to a few more conversations and the creation of a project that we called the Arbutus ARME. So that's spelled ARME, which is the binomial species code for Arbutus menziesii. We're a small growing madrone fam club focused on conservation and restoration of the species. And that's a quick history on things. What I was interested in asking you all before we kind of get rolling into this, I just wanted to know what sparked your interest in Pacific madrone and what your experience is with the species.
I always liked madrone. I'm from California, and I have great memories of climbing them and playing with them and peeling the bark and all that. And I just think they're really great trees. So I was really happy to have the opportunity to study them when I was at UW doing PhD work.
So for me, my dad's grandma, so my great-great-great-grandma had property on the coast, on the water of the Puget Sound, sort of near Anacortes. And we spent a few weeks every summer on this property growing up. is still shared by my dad and his siblings. And I think madrone is always the tree that stuck out the most to me in my memory, even before I knew anything about forestry. And it's a pretty iconic species. And there's a couple specific trees that are on the islands of the Puget Sound that I can remember vaguely from childhood. It's a species that's really a privilege to be able to study. And because it's not a commercial forestry species, we're super fortunate to be able to do some research with it. I can't think of the right word, but it's like magical species to work on.
I agree. That's a good word. It's magic. I mean, it's really, we don't have to have special scientific terms for it or something. I think, that really just comes from the heart, I think, right? And most people speak well of the tree. Mostly it's like arborists, I think, who have issues with it. Or if landowners who have like unfortunate circumstances that befall the tree. But mostly I think it's pretty well loved.
I could just picture some curmudgeon with a leaf blower underneath his giant arbutus, not happy with it when maybe the neighbors are like thrilled to see it every day out their window.
A person tell me that, they're always dropping something. It's bark, it's leaves, it's whatever. They just didn't like it because they were so messy.
Messy. Yeah. And I think too, they are messy. They don't grow straight like, a typical tree. And I think that's what makes them cool, that they lean towards the light or out over the water. And they're not your traditional straight up and down tree.
That's part of the reason they're magical, is because they're so distinct and they stand out. And even if you look half a mile out onto the islands from the bay, you can see them sticking out in the edges of the forest there. They're distinct red bark and weird growth forms. I think it's important to highlight, as you already have, part of the reason that we're really grateful to be able to work with this species is the cultural value and kind of indigenous heritage and legacy that this species has been a part of. And every time we talk about coastlands, or I talk about coastlands, we're really talking about Coast Salish lands. And it's wonderful to be able to study it, but it's maybe the best part is that we're connected to something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll just mention that I think it's really important. Every time I talk to people about it, I'm like, we should learn more about the wildlife interactions with madrone and preserve it for wildlife, because we know a lot of wildlife depends on it for like the berries and pollination and things like that, habitat. So, I'd be really happy if somebody studied that.
This is sort of a tangent, but I've been in discussions with the Audubon Society in Seattle, where we're going to launch an iNaturalist project about birds in western red cedar. And you can ask the same questions. So we're interested in the health of red cedar trees. And so we have one project where people can share about red cedar. But then if we have another project about the birds within those red cedar, and you can ask questions like, how healthy was that red cedar? And start to look at, are there different birds in these different health categories, essentially? And at some point, do the same with madrone.
I'd love to see that, because I know the disease, the shoot blight, gets on the fruit, and that has an impact on seed production and regeneration and stuff, but nobody's really looked at that systematically. I think that would be really interesting.
When I pick the berries, often, you see that little bit of blight on there, or some sort of fungus. I wonder if those are still viable seeds. And two, that's kind of questionable whether or not you want to pop those in your mouth. I don't think there's much to read about bird interaction with madrone. The only article I can remember is in that book that encapsulates the proceedings from the Madrone Symposium in 1999.
Like that, yeah. And that had a lot more to do with, I think, habitat, like cavity nesting birds and them using madrone for nesting habitat.
Right. And so since they do have this sort of proclivity for heart rot, right? Or in some cases, it makes a great cavity for birds or secondary cavity nesters. It's cool. So much to learn. Well, I think we'll jump to the recording of the webinar, and then I'll catch you all on the back end to answer some additional questions that we didn't get answered.
Welcome, everybody, for joining. Glad you're here. Really excited to have Michael Yadrick joining us to talk about madrones. It's clearly a topic that excites and resonates with a lot of folks who are joining us. And a few things, we have this question and answer open. Happy to have questions as we go. Go ahead and put them in. We'll probably wait till the end to do the question and answer portion of it. We're here in Tacoma and recognize that that is land of the Puyallup tribe and that it was stolen, and that the people of the Puyallup continue to live and thrive on this ancestral land. And it's our responsibility to be supportive in whatever way we can. And as a Tacoma Tree Foundation, one thing we can do is to respectfully help restore the lands and waters and to work in partnership and be as supportive as we can. So with that, I would like to invite Michael to share a bit about Madrones. Michael comes to us from the Green Seattle Partnership and also the founder of Tree Hugger podcast. He's also a board member of SER and Tacoma Tree Foundation. So that's why he is here with us. I'm really glad to have him. I am going to go ahead and invite him to share his screen. Thanks so much, Michael.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon from wherever you are, up and down the west coast of Turtle Island, I expect. I really appreciate the chance to come talk to you today. I really, really love Tacoma Tree Foundation and their mission, and I'm really appreciative and grateful for the chance to share what I know and what I'm continuing to learn about this tree. So I'm wearing, a bunch of hats today. I am the co-creator of the Arbutus ARME, which really is carried out in partnership with Washington State University Extension Pathology Program. However, we don't really endeavor to hold it really tight. We don't really want to centralize it. We don't want to be the center of its world. We really hope to contribute and tell people more about the tree so we can help with its resurgence. So no doubt that these trees in general are sacred and they provide, essential services, especially during this time that we're living in through the pandemic. Sarah acknowledged that we're broadcasting on Puyallup territory right now, and I'm obligated to tell you that not only are we in Coast Salish territory, we endeavor to work across the range of this tree, which starts in what is now British Columbia and extends all the way down into Baja, we think. So lots of people throughout the time who have interacted with the species and continue to steward the species. And really, we want to pay our respects to those folks who were the original stewards of the earth, and they have rights to their culture and to the tree. And we really just want to build our relationships really respectively moving forward. So you did answer a question about where your Wi-Fi is tuning in from. We really entertain you now, if you'd like to, in the chat somewhere, to acknowledge or tell us whose land you're on right now. And I use this very great website. It says nativeland.ca to find out kind of where you are if you don't know already. So kind of going back starting with a little bit of history and context about the tree. There is other names for it, and I haven't said, I don't know if I've said the name yet, but there were names going back into time memorial, and there's numerous ones. So, and I just want to highlight a few. One was from the qʷuqʷuάλλəc peoples, where they live currently is in British Columbia. And, not only is it important to know whose land we are on, but the origin story of those folks. The tree stands out very prominently in the origin story of the Saanich people, or often it's termed the Saanich people. And I'd seen this on several websites, and it took me a bit to actually find it on their tribe's website, which I've linked to down at the bottom. But I recall I actually found this. I read about this quite a bit in the Pojar McKinnon. I think I know there's a lot of plant geeks out there. You probably have it within reach. If you don't, you might be freaking out a little bit, like you lost your keys or your wallet. But that story is recounted on the Arbutus page 49. So in the Saanich story, that the survivors of the Great Flood were able to tie a cedar rope to the Arbutus tree at the top of what they call Mount Newton today. And it's very rare. I think the only origin story that I know that kind of figures the Arbutus in there. So, and then there's also the southern Lushootseed name. So in the area that we are in southern Puget Sound, and I'm going to attempt to say it, but it's qʷuqʷuάλλəc, right? So I think it's important to know that there were names, and I'm going to go into the settler colonial history of the tree right now, but I just want to acknowledge that it is played very prominently in people's lives. So in European terms, Europeans came upon the tree in the late 1700s, and, largely, I think many of you probably know this already, but it's in this Ericaceae family. And so that's the heath family. And then the genus is Arbutus. And the etymology of Arbutus actually is Latin for the term arbor. So I figure this genus has played such an important role in history that it, even stemming from Latin, is the essence of tree, right, for arbor. So the lineage of Arbutus actually includes 14 species of flowering shrubs and trees, such as the strawberry tree, or otherwise known as madrone, or in Ireland. So the strawberry tree, this Arbutus unido, which is very common to our landscapes, like it grows very well in Mediterranean climates, and you're probably familiar with it. It looks very similar to madrone. It is found in like Southern Europe, and actually there's scattered populations into Ireland. So my name is Michael Yadrick, right? My last name actually comes from the Balkans. And actually, my ancestry is broadly European and Irish too. So I kind of spun this story recently that, my ancestors perhaps could have interacted with the strawberry tree, back in the day. And it is so important too that this El Oso y el Madroño, the statue, it sits in the Puerta del Sol. I think it's this plaza somewhere in Madrid. And it's actually on the Madrid city crest, and dating back to the year 1212, like 1212. So we have this, long history with Arbutus, which I feel like is fairly significant. And really, so it's no doubt that when the first note of madrone in North America came from missionary Juan Crespi during the Portola expedition in 1769, 1770 in the Californias. So they named it according to what it looked like. And so I guess he was pretty right on, because it's Arbutus. And then the Menziesii comes from Archibald Menzies, who basically sailed along with George Vancouver into Puget Sound. Well, I assume collected it, but it was first named by Frederick Persh in the 1814 work, which is called A Systematic Arrangement and Description of the Plants in North America, right? A lot of this information is on the Arbutus ARME website, so arbutusarme.org, and you can find that in the page called Madrone 101. So I just want to tell you that we're sort of all-inclusive here. I know there's actually quite a difference in the naming, so I will say madrone. You can say madronio, madrona, which took me a long time to get used to. Our neighbors north of the border into Canada generally refer to it as Arbutus. But it is found up and down the jagged edge of North America. And then there are these scattered populations really into San Diego County and maybe perhaps into Mexico. I'm not really sure. But these remnant or kind of scattered populations are fairly disconnected. I think you can all see my big cursor here. It's kind of overlapping with Tijuana. This middle map comes from the California Native Plant Society. It's pretty awesome. There's populations and forest types up in the Sierra Nevada in very high elevations away from salt water. And then this tree snap map, I'll tell you a little bit more about this app that we're using to actually collect, using our phones to collect GPS information, location, and health information about trees wherever we find them. There's other Arbutus in North America. This Arbutus arizonica, I don't know, my love has grown really for Arbutus, and I really sort of endeavor to learn more about them. But there is this Arbutus arizonica. So, back in the day, it could have overlapped with the southern range of the Arbutus menziesii. It looks very similar. They all look fairly similar and all have a lot of same traits, that they have like peely bark, kind of red to green to yellow. And then they have these evergreen leaves with these lanceolate to elliptical shaped leaves. They're all fairly similar. So, culturally, the tree is very important. And these are some of the gifts that the tree has provided and continues to provide. And I've highlighted some of those right now in red that you'll see. So a lot of this list is available on the North American Ethnobotany database. It's pretty incredible. It gives me hits for just about any species that I put in there. But so for the bark of Arbutus menziesii, we know that we can create furniture with it. These days, like a boutique market for like flooring and tables and things like that. But if anybody knows anything about madrone, it's that and I've known this from like as a kid, like splitting wood in the backyard, and my stepdad telling me that madrone wood burns long, it burns hot. So in my mind, it just makes me feel nice, warm inside, that peat has been keeping people warm for centuries, right? It's also important for wildlife. So bees are the primary pollinator on these white urn-shaped flowers that pop out in April-ish, depending on the range. The berries, I would encourage you to eat them. It's maybe an acquired taste. I will tell you that this webinar is for entertainment purposes only, so it's not meant to like cure anything you have, but as a preventative measure, perhaps. So not only are these berries for birds to disseminate, but people can eat them as well, and they make a pretty tasty fermented beverage, I hear as well. The other thing about the twigs is that, back in the day, before we shopped on Amazon, you could make toys or dolls like out of the twigs, or fish hooks, whatnot. And then out of the leaves, there's uses for the leaves as well. And most recently, from foraged and found edibles in Georgetown, I found a good tea made out of the leaves. And so, despite this relationship that we've had with the tree since time immemorial, there are these myths about the tree that occur in pretty much anything you read about the tree. So, and some of those myths, and these are like ripe, it's basically like a challenge. I was like, this cannot be, but they're kind of self-reinforcing, and they're almost like conversation killers. People often say like the tree is very beautiful, but it's just bound to die, bound to fail. And like, that's the end of the conversation. The other myth is that it's hard to grow, which has some truth to it, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. The other one is that it's fragile and it's dying, and I'll refute that as well. The other thing is like you observe, but you don't touch it. If you touch it, it'll get sick. If you touch it, it'll fall down. And most recently, I started to hear this one just about substituting it. So like not even considering it as an option in our landscape anymore, and we should start to substitute it with things that can functionally replace it. So that is hard for me to handle, probably for the 142 of you out there as well. Since we have such a deep past with it, I think we want it into our future as well. I follow the Madrone news. I have this little Google alert that pops up every few days. It's with a lot of BS, but there's news that's come out in the past couple of weeks. So the largest madrone in Washington that was up in Port Angeles finally failed, essentially, and it was cut down. So on the left, it's referred to as Ted's tree. Yeah, from these cross sections of wood, you can actually see like it doesn't look too bad, like not a lot of rot like in the wood. However, from some of the more aerial images of the architecture of the tree, you could see there were no leaves on the tree, and it's sort of been each branch had been sort of dying back over the years, and so we knew it was in rough shape. And this is a madrone of significant size. Oftentimes they do not grow to this stature, and so this one was like old, right? They don't make it to the size. Yeah, and then this other one too, news out of Oak Harbor, is that they're getting a bigger McDonald's. This woman somehow got the attention of the Whidbey News Times, and this story about the tree is about madrone. Because of building codes, regardless of whether or not McDonald's wants to like reconfigure their drive-through or whatever, they can't because of certain codes and lack of protection for the tree, right? Too in the municipality. But again, in these stories, those myths surface, like about this tree is beautiful, it's very important, but it's sick. And for whatever reason, like regardless of the story, there's always these myths about the tree. What's incredible about the tree, we do see them growing in very tough conditions. Visually looking at land from the waters, if you're out on the water, you see them growing out of cliffs, you see them growing out of gravel. So the incredible thing that gives all the ericaceous plants this ability to access or to survive on the edge of the Western world really is the widespreading root system is associated with Ericaceae mycorrhiza, right? So I think there's this hub of fungal diversity underground. Even though we mostly interact with the tree above ground, underground, there's so much stuff going on. And if you all have dug into any of Susan Samard's work from British Columbia, like trees interact and talk and share resources underground. This fungus in particular is characterized by these coils. So right down here, these coils that form in the epidermal cells of the fine hair roots of Ericaceae species. So the fungi colonize the root cells and establish hyphal networks around the roots, providing increased water and nutrient absorption, while the plant in turn provides the fungus with carbohydrates through photosynthesis, right? So we kind of know about mycorrhizal associations with a lot of trees, but ericoid, I think, are very specific for Ericaceous plants. So I think this is one of the biggest reasons why madrone has the ability to persist through drought and thrive in really harsh conditions. And so also there's been some study about madrone soil community and its links to nearby Douglas fir that may assist with disease resistance in the tree. I'm really big on this concept of emergence, right? So very complex outcomes come from very simple interactions. And just like in nature, like we see in nature, my hope is too that our networks, like the Arbutus ARME network too, will act like this. In that way, we can thrive by mimicking nature. So here's a little bit about the Arbutus ARME. We celebrate everything Pacific Madrone, and we like to highlight conservation and restoration efforts about the tree and to connect people along the way. So these are principally what we focus on is the education, conservation, and connection. I've just highlighted a few things about how you can dial in and get tuned into what we're doing. One is just a look for us on social media or look for the website, and you can find out more about the tree. We try to educate specifically about madrone and its importance, some of its downfalls. But then conservation-wise, I will talk more specifically about tree snap and your ability to contribute to this community-based science effort that we've got going on. And the other thing is just connecting people, because like I said, we're going to become this range-wide network at some point in time and contribute to the resurgence of the tree. So the one thing we've done very recently was we had a meeting. And I'm going to show you some of the results of like some of the latest and greatest madrone science out right now. But the other thing is we just created this listserv so people can just like chatter online, like any listserv. And when I find stories about a McDonald's going up in Oak Harbor, like I can tell everyone about it. So one thing that came out of our meeting, so Janneke Peterson, who's a teacher and creator of a syllabi that walks teachers and students through how to grow a big old madrone tree from a very little seed. And so this is something that's available. It's pretty much like it's sitting there. It's a resource that's available. There's lots of potential energy associated with it, but it's really like unfunded at this time. But it's really incredible. This is just one of these things like connecting people. There's all this expertise out there in the world, and she just popped up on our radar fairly recently. I think it's something we should take advantage of if someone wants to utilize it. The other thing, there was a study came out early last year. These folks in Santa Cruz studied Pacific madrone and coast live oak through the droughts in the early 2010s in California. What we know already really is that Arbutus menziesii is drought resistant. It doesn't handle extremes, like doesn't handle super cold weather, like cold extremes, and doesn't handle like really intense hot conditions, right? But it is a climate change winner, I believe. And so Jarmila Pitterman and her folks down at UC Santa Cruz went through and actually discussed the importance, the mechanisms behind why these guys are survivors, right? So deep roots, depending on the substrate that's growing on, sometimes it can form really deep roots to access that moisture that's available. The other thing is that it has this diffuse porous vessel structure, right? So these small diameter vessels which convey water up the tree, so they're small but very dense, right? And there's these small conduits that really confer this embolism resistance, and this hydraulic safety margin, which they discussed in the paper. Amazing things. The other thing was they talked about this other life history trait, which is drought deciduousness, and we get calls about this, not calls, no one calls me, emails about this all the time, that in the summertime, the madrone in our yards, the leaves will start to turn yellow and they'll fall off. And it's like, is the tree dying? So yellow is fine. Yellow is somewhat normal for that tree to drop its leaves. However, the brown, the silvery leaves that we'll get into a little bit later, that's the danger. Brown is and brown leaves are deaf. So the other cool thing that's come up, and so grateful to Washington State University Extension for participating in this range-wide common garden trial. So right now, there was actually one in the Bay Area which burned in a few years back in some wildfire. But right now, there are 4 common gardens trials going in like 3 different places. So at Sprague Orchard, Southern Oregon, Starker Forest in Willamette Valley, and then at Puyallup. So right down the road from me here, this woman, Renata Pulten-Kamakura from Duke University, who is looking at growth and disease resistance, essentially, in these common garden studies. So what a common garden is, it's essentially they've taken like 140, 160 some odd seeds from different mother trees from up and down the range and planted them all into these rows, essentially. Kind of like a farm, kind of like a madrone farm. There's not too many of them. And then analyzing data from that's collected about their growth and what diseases show up. And really what we're showing in Puyallup is that the trees that are growing most robustly and that are showing less disease are the trees actually from the Willamette Valley area. So this is heartening because, there are diseases and pathogens that befall the tree. It is important to find something somehow that could actually give a tree some disease resistance, or also with climate change adaptation, there's this thing called assisted gene flow, or essentially you can take seed from one spot and move it up. So take Willamette Valley trees and bring them to Puget Sound, perhaps, and it would help to pre-adapt populations to the warming conditions that are expected mid-century to late century. Another thing with a warming world is that, this is a snapshot of forest fires back in September, August. I don't know, y'all remember, it's kind of like ancient history, right? But a few months ago, the West Coast was on fire. And if you see these little hot spots that show up here overlap with the madrone range, madrone evolved with fire and it has survived with fire. And there has been a policy of the state to dispossess indigenous peoples of their lands, of their cultures and their language and their practices such as cultural burning and whatnot. So we've removed fire from the landscape. And we're kind of suffering the consequences in a warming world because of increased fuel loads, yada, yada, yada. We all know, I think some of us know the intricacies of that. But I think this is one of the coolest things about the tree. So before I leave you, if I could just tell you about lignotubers. So this is the best picture I can find. It's kind of hard to know what's going on here. But at the base of the stem, where the stem meets the ground, is this woody swelling at the root crown. So a more vague term is burl. I don't think it's exactly, a burl could be something different, but it can be more pronounced in some trees than others. This is very pronounced, right? So this portion of the tree contains these dormant buds that store carbohydrates and nutrients necessary for bud development that supports growth where new stems can sprout vegetatively. So this reproductive strategy has evolved in perennial shrubs, often from Mediterranean type ecosystems. So in this part I'm going to read, this thousands of meristemic foci may be present. Similar to stem cells, undifferentiated cells in tissue are capable of growing and changing into new shoots in response to fire or other damage. And this is what allows the trees to resprout or replace stems that have been lost. So essentially, maybe forever. Who knows? No one's studied this, right? But what you can see here, this is a tree that I'm familiar with in Seward Park in Seattle. So you can see there was maybe perhaps a multi-stemmed madrone here. One stem failed, and what you're seeing is the outcome of that lignotuber activating, so it can resprout. I don't think these trees are fragile at all. This is one growing out of a weird parking lot in a hospital in Lacey, Washington. There's this is at Swan Creek Park. I don't know how this happened, but this madrone ate this hose. I think this may have been a sort of impromptu rope swing or hose swing that was tied to the tree, but over time someone left the hose and the madrone kept it. There's this one, growing over the railings. So if you leave something too close to a madrone for too long, it will keep it forever. So if you want your fence, Yeah, put your fence a little bit further away. I think I've tried to impress upon you all that the tree is like amazing. It's not fragile. However, we know that there's dozens of diseases and pathogens which affect this tree. And I've sort of characterized them into how they affect different parts of the tree. So either on the stems, on the leaves, on the twigs, or down near the roots. And these are some common species and their indicators, really what they are, right? So I think the canker, like this sunken black area on the main stem of the tree, is fairly familiar to everyone. You know it when you see it. I think I'm right on this, the difference between the leaf blight and the twig dieback. Like this is blight, which is very apparent right now because most of us are in very cold conditions. So you'll see this like browning of the leaves. However, in the spring, it'll pop up and look beautiful and totally normal. This one I think is alive and it's just blighted because you'll see actually what it appears to be flowers on it. However, symptom of twig dieback is actually this, where the whole twig or eventually the whole limb might die back, is this like silvery color to the leaves and then actually just like death to the twig. So I think the take-home message is really generally is that it needs to grow in certain conditions, right? So well-drained sites are surrounded by compatible vegetation. Douglas firs are its best buddy, salal, ocean spray, evergreen huckleberry. So it can form those proper mycorrhizal associations. Compacted sites over excessive irrigation, fertilization, pollution, or physical damage like backing your truck into the tree, hitting it with a weed whacker, are basically no-nos and will lead to decline of the tree. The tree is drought tolerant, but I think more and more, and with extended drought and warming conditions around everywhere, essentially, we think like pretty much infrequent but deep watering can help. If it doesn't respond to that and it gets worse, you probably have a root rot problem. So one thing that people can do to help is you can get dialed in actually just right now. If you all just want to take out if you're not already like on multiple devices, take out your mobile device, you go to treesnap.org or look for it in the store. You can download this app, and what it allows us to do when we do travel, you can see we're pretty Puget Sound centric, right? But we've been snapping trees up and down the range for a year and a half maybe now. There are some champions out there, and probably I hope folks that are tuning in, members of the Army that are snapping a ton of trees. So really what it allows us to do is using the location services on the phone, it pinpoints that tree on the map. And then there's just a small handful of questions that you answer about the condition of that tree. And so we can build this long-term data set, which helps us actually decipher where exactly the tree is, because that range map I showed you at the very beginning is somewhat not correct. And the other thing it helps us do is to track condition of the trees over time and space. That's pretty much what I have for you is in regards to presentation. I'm willing to take some questions.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Michael. And there are a lot of questions I can maybe start reading some of them.
Sure.
There are a lot of sort of ecological questions, so maybe we could group those all together. Do Arizonica and Menziei hybridize?
Woo, good question. I did probably too deep of a dive earlier this week because Sarah and I rallied earlier, and it really just started with the naming of the tree, right? And like where madrone comes from. And so there are other arbutus, like there's one that's very specific to the Canary Islands. It only grows in Canary Islands. And then there's these other ones like a Texas madrone, and there's several species that grow around like in kind of the Texas, Mexico area, cross-border, right? Doesn't respect like the political boundaries or the great walls that we have built through that area. I imagine they could hybridize. That's a big guess. I'm going to say yes. And I think in the past they were probably connected. However, if they've been connected for such a long time, like let's say centuries or whatever, there is potential for some outbreeding depression. So long term, like it may not produce fit individuals, so they may not survive. But however, if they do connect over time, they could perhaps Darwinism, could shake out. Like it could just work itself out. But I would say, there's potential. But I haven't heard of this crossbreeding between Arbutus unido, which is more common, I think, in our landscapes, and Arbutus menziesii. So good question. I might do a little deeper dive, try to figure that out.
Cool. I love it. I am a plant geek, and so it's awesome to hear all this. So next one is Salal related?
They are. I think they're both, in the heath family. Whew, these are really geeky questions. Salal is Gaultheria shalom, and yes, they are.
Okay. What can be done about leaf blight or twig dieback? Is it fatal?
The bad news is there's no cure. So the tree, it's not this economically viable tree where like all this funding, like Douglas fir, like millions and millions of dollars going to like researching and keeping Douglas fir alive and growing it in these like monocultures that we see across the Pacific Northwest and across its range, right? So really those little snapshots of what I shared with you a few minutes ago, that is pretty much the madrone research that's happening right now. So there is, I would say, the Washington State University plant pathology program, Oregon State University, there's a few little hubs of research going on, but there is no cure right now. However, the tree can live a long time sick. And I think you all have seen these trees that are either are blighted, have cankers. I think the death spiral that we see in the real decline is when both the leaves are affected and there's multiple cankers, and there's multiple symptoms or multiple diseases present on one tree. And so, if the leaves aren't living, they're not photosynthesizing, right? And if there's too many cankers, it's not conveying sugars and water and nutrients like up and down the chain in the tree, and that's where you start to see the decline. But it can take a while.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, how about when are the leaves of madrone supposed to fall?
So like a lot of Mediterranean type plants, they drop in the summertime. And so yellowing is generally fine, like again, but the silvery brown, that's the death color.
Is the root system shallow and spreading or deep with more of a taproot?
So it's known to have a taproot. However, I would say, depending on the substrate, like you will see them, you're on a ferry boat ride through the San Juans and you'll see them just perched and just their roots wrapped around a rock. So in those conditions, those trees can be very old, but they're just growing at the speed that they can access nutrients and water in those very shallow soils.
You said infrequent deep watering. How often would you consider infrequent?
We actually put madrone out into our restorations. We often will water, I'll prescribe something like twice a month. So deep waterings, like 5 gallons at a time. So deep watering. So the thing is air circulation is fairly important, and you will often find it in nature in these rapidly draining soils. So you don't want to keep a lot of organic matter around the stem, or we'll grow the trees out to a certain height where a lot of the foliage is off the ground as well, not laying on the organic matter or on the turf. If you're in a clay soil, it's going to hang on. You probably likely have root rot anyway. But if you're in well-drained soils and you really love this tree and for whatever reason it's struggling, one long watering like once or twice a month, I think would be a good start. And you can always ping us, right? I think it's good to experiment and we can communicate, because I'm guessing, but I've crowdsourced a lot and we get a lot of feedback, but there's no scientific research about how much you should water.
So maybe get on the listserv and
get on the listserv for sure. We'll do a watering experiment.
Is it common for a madrone to be split in the middle, or is that a sign they are sick or stressed?
So like a crack. I've seen trees that were single stems and whatever reason they were cut down, and you'll see them resprout. So, multiple stems or if forest fire has gone through, multiple stem trees are fairly important. However, that's where some of the weakness is as well. So there's actually one of the arborists with whom I work is the leader, sort of the go-to guys at the Pacific Northwest Tree Failure Database, and that's often where you're seeing the failures. Yeah, often in winter, right? So if it is compromised by canker, perhaps, or by root rot, those weak spots at the crotch of the stems is where you'll see the failures.
What can we do for a 20-year-old tree that does have root rot?
Nothing, unfortunately. I don't think there's anything you can do. Like, there's no cure. So those couple of species that we mentioned, the Phytophthora and the Armillaria. The Phytophthora for sure. It basically the propagules like swim in water, like in puddling and whatnot. And there's really not much you can do. You'll see seedlings emerge like in really weird spots. Like I see forest types where you see madrone growing right next to like black cottonwood. It's like kind of the weirdest thing. There's a couple places in Seattle and across the sound where I've seen it happen, but it just doesn't really thrive in these like clay soils.
Yeah, I have a question about that, but I'll keep going. So can you clarify what you mean by emergent? Does that mean that it tolerates standing water, or do you mean something different?
Oh, I mean something different. Yeah, so this emergence section, I'm a big fan. I've been reading this. I did a big deep dive into Adrienne Marie Brown's books the last couple months. And so she has this book called Emergence Strategy, which is really focused on forming our social movements, kind of mimicking nature. And so she talks about this concept of emergence. And doesn't have nothing really to do with emergent vegetation. Different concept.
There are a number of questions asking where to get madrone seed sources or starts.
One of the myths was like, no one grows it, right? Or, no one's growing it. You can't find it out there. So on the website, there's a map and a catalog essentially of a few nurseries that have contributed to our survey that are listed. I would defer to that list because they're awesome because they actually like responded to me. So there's some around, but I think there's many that are missing, and some are only wholesale nurseries. There's a seed house on there too, like Inside Passage Seeds, which is in Port Townsend, can provide seed, and they may very well be able to get you like Willamette Valley seed as well. Seed sourcing is a huge issue, not just for the landowners, but for land managers, for everyone.
Also, question: how can you propagate seeds from the wild? Should you? And do the berries need to be stratified?
Yes, berries need to be stratified. They need to go through between 30 and 90 days cold stratification in cold temps. And there is on our website at the resources page, there's actually a webinar that's recorded on YouTube where we talk about that, but there's also a few static presentations that we have, and normally we do talk about that. So there's kind of a do-it-yourself method that folks use. It's kind of based on volume. So if you have access to a lot of seeds, you can actually just like put them in a bucket and just let them kind of marinate in the cold for a while. And some people just put them straight into flats and soils and just let them kind of stratify themselves outside. But the other way to do is like separate the seeds from the berries and then put them in the fridge.
Cool. I know in some seeds you have to kind of act like the mammal that would have been chewing on them and kind of rough them up a bit. Is that the sort of thing you'd have to do with madrone seeds?
Let me see here. I do, if we have a second, if you can stall, I have a different PowerPoint. I could show you what the seeds look like. So here are the seeds under a microscope at our Jefferson horticulture facility. We'll just soak them and then whir them through the blender and create like this cake. And then when the cake dries, like just separate winnowing using like a compressed air to kind of winnow or separate the chaff from the seed. And then you're left with this, there's some chaff in there, but yeah, the seeds they're just they look like a freckle, super tiny. And you can get like between, 6 or 20, a couple dozen seeds out of one berry.
And we're also getting some people responding about where they have been able to find madrone. And one was King Conservation District's plant sale. And I think there was another one, Native Foods Nursery.com, or wafarmforestry.com. There are actually a lot of questions. I know we're not getting quite to all of them, but I think maybe if you have a specific question that doesn't get answered in the next minute and a half, then maybe you could reach out. What would be the best way to reach out to you, Michael?
I think the best way is to go to Arbutus ARME, ARME @gmail.com is a good way to go, and then we can tag team. Did I mention my co-conspirators, Arbutus ARME, so Marianne Elliott, Washington State University Extension Plant Pathology Program, and then Joey as well, Hubert at Wazoo too, and they're the smart ones that can answer some different style questions, particularly about diseases or whatnot. Or you can ping us. You can send me a direct message on social media too.
We do have a question that, Tacoma Tree Foundation, we do a lot of stuff with street trees. And so there was a question about how well do madrones do as street trees? I'm curious if there are some examples too.
Is Mike Carey on the line? I'm going to tell you that they do well as street trees. They're the best. You should grow them all over Tacoma in the right of way. They're not on the, and Sarah could answer this question, they're not on the official list, are they? So it might be illegal. As the adjacent person dwelling to the street, we are the ones caring for the tree. That most people have is based on these myths that they're beautiful, but they're bound to fail. They're going to fall on someone, right? They're leaning, so they're going to fall over. But we know they lean towards the light, and they have this crazy, like emergent fractal shape that occurs in nature. So they bend, right? You can't get 2x4s, Douglas fir, straight 2x4s out of them. So, but the one thing is that they're not on the official street tree list. So if you have the space, I think they do okay. So extreme heat is the killer for them, right? Extreme weather. So like freezing conditions, extended freezing conditions, or just like this really intense heat. And you can actually sometimes see scalding on the stems of them. But sometimes the best spots that we've seen are nestled in the near buildings, not too close to the building, but where they can be somewhat protected from like high winds, but also catch a little radiant heat off the building.
Cool. There are so many good questions, but I do want to ask, there are a couple that are quick questions, I think, like are they self-fertile? Would they do better if there were several other madrones around to cross-pollinate?
Yeah, so the plant is dioecious, so it has both male and female organs pollinated by bees. This plant is self-fertile. But I would say, like, for the sake of diversity, you probably want more. I would say more madrones better. Is that the question? Should I grow more than one madrone?
Yeah, I think the question is, are they more successful together?
Right.
Essentially.
I don't know. Generally, if there is Doug fir present, I'll plant them like within the drip line of Douglas firs. It's like, again, it's probably a myth that's like I'm perpetuating. That there's a little bit of research about it, but I think it can lead to more success.
A very big thank you to Michael for your willingness to do this and doing such a wonderful job at it too. Madrone is awesome. I think we're all still on this call because there's just so much more to learn about madrone, and I think that's really cool. It's just such a special plant.
I just want to express my gratitude and to everyone out there across Madrone land. Really glad that we could meet. I can't see you. It's so weird. Like, I do a lot of dad jokes, so I can't know if they land or if people are just rolling their eyes at me. So it's just, I know you're out there though. I can see the little head down here and the number. So I'm just assuming people are hanging out eating lunch.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope to see you again next month or other months in the future, and hopefully in person at some point too. Thank you, Michael.
Take care. Thank you. So I think I answered pretty much everyone's questions, but sometimes, I don't know, people stayed around for, the webinar was only an hour, but people actually stuck around for like almost another 20 minutes. In the preceding week before the webinar, I did like a big dive on Arbutus just in general. And I think it was interesting to read more about the Arbutus arizonica and these species that cross the border, the imaginary border into Mexico. And there was a question about whether or not Arbutus menziesii and Arbutus arizonica hybridize. And I guess there was a comment from Richard Sniesko that actually there is a group, I don't know if they're active, but a group at San Diego State University that was working on Arbutus species relationships. I don't know if you all know about that at all, but I just found it fascinating that there's potentially these other relationships that people have with other Arbutus, and perhaps we should join forces with other groups if they exist. So the question was whether or not they hybridize. And my answer was maybe, perhaps like at some point in time that the ranges properly overlap, but that if they had been disconnected for quite a while, like I think maybe there's less and less of a chance that they would be successful in hybridizing. What do you guys think?
Yeah, that's probably true. I personally don't know much about the other species of Arbutus. So in general, though, A lot of these you probably could hybridize in, say, the lab or in the greenhouse, but whether they do it in natural conditions is kind of more what we're interested in, right?
There is hybridization within the genus. You can buy Arbutus marina at nurseries here. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen that one recommended as a substitute for Arbutus menziesii because a lot of people think they're done for.
And in terms of genetic conservation, should there be any concern about it hybridizing with menziesii? Hard to say.
I don't know. That's a good question.
How long before it's like out in the middle of the San Juans, reproducing naturally?
I don't know. For something to kind of go crazy and really become invasive, generally, it would need to be able to establish and disperse and probably be, dispersed multiple times successfully to really like invade other areas. So, things that do hybridize pretty freely out there are like the prunus, right? Like cherries, hawthorns, I think do it. Those are the really ones that we see that become issues in the natural areas.
Yeah, that's powerful perspective. I think that I'm just a rabble rouser. You don't have to take my concerns as
no, it's okay. No, I agree. I think
substantial.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important to protect the menziesii, and I think there's portions of the range where menziesii is sort of having trouble, but I think there's other portions of the range where it's still pretty much going strong.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, related to disease and bringing in something that could do better. I was at a meeting a few years ago talking, and it was about Phytophthora root disease. And they were talking about cork oak in Spain, which is being pretty severely hit by Phytophthora cinnamomi root disease. But there's an Asian oak species that's very similar in its appearance and so forth to cork oak, and the bark is similar, and it could be a good replacement, but it's not native. So should they plant that because it's resistant to the root disease and they'll still get the same benefit from it that they get from the cork oak? That's a good question to think about. Some of these other Arbutus species are better at fighting off the leaf blight than menziesii. Should we be planting those or hybridizing?
So it's maybe not like an ecological question. Maybe it's just more of like a social question about whether or not the community would really accept it or accept that outcome or accept that as the goal of reintroduction.
If they look the same and behave the same in the ecosystem, only they don't get the disease.
There's another species that's been proposed at a few different symposiums I've been at as a substitute for Arbutus menziesii. One is golden chinkapin because it's another broadleaf evergreen. Has a very small range up here in Washington. I think it really the sort of remnant populations in the Puget Sound is like, well, there's one on the Hood Canal, and then there's one I can't recall a little bit further north. But kind of similar traits, but very, very different in some ways.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that we should give up on Arbutus menziesii, and plant something else, but selection for blight-resistant individuals, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, now's a good time to put in a plug for your Common Garden study.
Right. Yeah, so that's one of the things that we're looking at with the Common Garden study that you can read about on the Arbutus ARME website. We're looking at madrone from the whole range to see how well they do in different climates, because we know it's a species that's affected by climate change. Some of the diseases are made worse, like leaf blight, under certain climate conditions. So we're really interested in looking for ones that are going to be able to survive that.
Cool. Yeah, and I'll put some links in the show notes so people can find out more about that. And I definitely, as data and information comes out about that, I'll let people know for sure. Okay, let's get into some other questions. Y'all ready? All right. So one question was, can you talk about leaf turnover times? For example, how long do individual leaves live before falling? I freestyled the answer to this question during the webinar. I don't know if actually I was correct. So what do y'all know?
We know that they stay on the tree for about a year and a quarter. So there is part of the time where both years of leaves are on. Usually, I think it's towards the summer when the new foliage is coming out and the old foliage has not completely senesced and fallen off yet. So they're kind of drooping in yellow. That's the old stuff. And then the new foliage is coming out. So there's a little bit of overlap. I mean, they're
Okay.
not like a conifer that's going to have several years of foliage on the branch. It's more like just a little bit of time where there's 2 years.
But does it flush more than once a year?
It can, yeah. So some years, especially if they're growing really vigorously and like at the top of the tree, you'll see maybe multiple flushes of foliage that happen. Long shoots with new foliage on them.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand how a tree can have, a full branch of leaves if it drops them every year.
One
Okay,
thing I
so
want to mention, though, sometimes there will be the old leaves will hang on for the whole year if they die really fast and they haven't had a chance to abscise or form that layer to make the leaf fall off, because they have the leaf blight infection. Some of them that are really have a severe infection, the foliage will stay attached. And then that gives the fungus an opportunity to infect the new foliage that's flushing out.
it's a crazy species. So it's an evergreen tree, but the leaves only stay on for a little over a year alive. But sometimes on a healthy tree, it will flush like multiple times. So then you can have 6 months apart, it'll flush, or like 2 times in the summer, I guess.
Yeah, it's more like 2 times in the summer. So while it's growing, while the shoots are expanding, then there will be new flush of foliage that comes out.
If it gets hammered by leaf blight, does it send out another flush sooner, you think?
I don't know. I don't know if it has anything to do with the leaf blight. I know that we've observed flushes that come out earlier in the season when there's more rain, when it's wet, tend to get hit with leaf blight. And then if you get a flush later in the summer when it's dry, they don't get as blighted because the fungus, there's not enough moisture for the fungus to get on there.
I think it's really cool how it just is able to adapt. Yeah, I've seen a few flushes at a time. I don't know if I've been able to count 4 at a time, but I do recall, I think Gary was telling us that a while back.
Yeah. The most I've ever seen is 3.
All right, I'm going to go to this next question. We talked about fire and how madrone has evolved with fire. I guess the question was, does madrone need fire? Or some surrogate for fire might be just adding ash, I guess, to the soil? What do y'all think?
Well, I think what it needs fire for is to clear space for it to grow. Not necessarily, I mean, maybe it's for the soil too, but I kind of think it does well in acidic soils. So the ash might not be the thing. It might be more just to clear space for it.
But it's not reliant on it for germination, right? Let's just be clear about that. But it just helps with, but it's definitely been adapted to some sort of fire regime, particularly in the southern part of the range, I would assume.
Yeah, that's probably true. It definitely grows like Southern Oregon where there's a lot of fires in those kind of mixed conifer stands. It's weird to think about what traits has it adapted or evolved to adapt to fire? Because it has very thin, flaky bark. So it's not like it has thick bark to protect it from fire. And it's not like a serotinous cone like, some of the conifers. It's just maybe that it can grow on really dry slopes and colonize areas before everything else.
Well, and it can do that, and it's more like eucalyptus, or things like that resprout. So so that root system's there. Everything burns off, and then it can resprout and grow much faster than a Douglas fir seedling can germinate. So it has the advantage.
Yep, I think that's one of the big superpowers.
Yeah, it's a superpower.
Yeah, it's true.
Right, yeah. Okay. What about this one? This was a question about why tree snap and not iNaturalist.
Oh, bummer. They asked that?
Yeah. It's a tough one. I think it's a good question, though. It's worth answering because, I think iNaturalist probably has a majority of the market as far as like nature apps are. I don't know what that market is called, but like nature apps where people can go in and make observations about a variety of species. But the question, I guess, is like, why we're using tree snap instead of iNaturalist?
I guess the question kind of comes down to like, how do these duplicate platforms even get established?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we are attracted to having a tree specific app, but now, as we were talking about previously, if we're interested in like doing a project about birds and madrone, we couldn't use tree snap. We would have to use an iNat or something. So it's a really good question. And if we had the knowledge now, we'd probably do it differently. And there's not really a reason that we can't use both, or maybe switch completely, but we don't want to do that to the Army.
So I do recall there was some email interactions. I think Marianne and I talked about a couple of times back and forth when Tree Snap came on the scene. Marianne had attended a conference in person when we were doing conferences in person, and they had done a presentation. I believe we were sort of smitten by the fact that they had some National Science Foundation funding behind them, as well as they seemed really smart, and they had incorporated other species that had kind of similar conservation challenges or things affecting them. So we felt like the Arbutus menziesii sort of fit into their framework.
It did, being specific to one tree species, but the initial purpose of Tree Snap was to identify individual trees, like a particular species that's being attacked by like emerald ash borer or chestnut blight or something, and you're looking for trees that are resistant to that disease or pest. And then that information would go to people who are breeding for resistance, and they can collect seed from those trees and build up a resistant population. So that was the idea behind it. But then I saw it and I thought, oh, well, this would be a great way to track madrone health. And especially I want to get an accurate representation of the range of the species, because I think that's changing. I think it's shifting northward from where it was back in the 80s when the range map that we all see was created. So that was my goal with Tree Snap. But I kind of feel like iNaturalist is a bit more flexible.
I guess seeing other species where they're searching for resistance and they've developed an app to identify resistant trees was appealing, I'm sure. And that's kind of an amazing project to develop a tool to specifically engage the public to look for resistant trees. And I think recognizing that there was a community already using the app was probably really motivating, and that there's a lot of people that were already using it to look for resistant trees, for example. So that's another thing to consider when you're weighing all these different tools is there a community out there? Clearly, iNaturalist has a strong community. And it's not like we can't use iNaturalist data. If a user wants to upload some observations of madrone on iNaturalist and not Tree Snap, that's totally fine. We won't get the data about the health of the trees and things like that, but we'll still have the distribution data because iNaturalist is open. It's kind of a pet or like a sticky point for me is that we really want to engage with the community, the Arbutus ARME community, to identify what's important to the community and then design a project around that. So then it's not just about collecting data, but it's about answering a question that the community is interested in or advancing knowledge that will help us conserve this species. And that's kind of what the data in the Tree Snap was designed to do. But I think it would be healthy to revisit that with the ARME again.
Yeah, it would.
All right. Table that, put that one on the parking lot. All right, next question. And I did answer this one, but I think you all are the fungal experts, so we'll just revisit this one. What can we do for a 20-year-old tree that has root rot? I think I said nothing.
That's such a good question. Yeah. Well, that's a fair answer too. The trouble with root rots is once it's in the site, it's pretty much impossible to remove. Your best decisions are keeping that site healthy and preventing new things from coming. Because once it's there, it's really difficult to remove. Marianne is particularly experienced with steaming as a kind of a restoration approach where you can lay tarps down on the soil and pump really hot steam, up to a foot or two deep into the soil and kind of sterilize the soil. But in most cases, like well-established, you said 20-year-old tree, those roots go pretty deep. The root rot is probably really deep. During my PhD, a lot of people, we had the same question with smaller plants, with proteas, kind of similar looking in some cases, but more like woody shrubs. And people would tell me, oh, if you just pour a cup of bleach around the tree, then it will kill the fungus. And if you want to poison the ground or kill everything in the ground, that's one approach, but it's definitely not sustainable or appropriate probably to just nuke the ground around the tree. But that has been suggested to me.
Well, I'll suggest it depends. If you have Phytophthora, that's one thing. Like you said, it's in wet soil. So you can improve the soil drainage. You could try to make a better environment for the trees to fight it off. If it's armillaria root rot, you'll see the symptoms of the white rot at the bottom. Maybe you'll see little mushrooms. Trees can live for a long time with armillaria, though. But yeah, the best thing you can do is try to make the tree healthier, by removing stresses, whatever those might be, like soil compaction, loosen up the soil, plant some other shrubs around it instead of turf, things like that. Just make a better environment for the roots to be in.
Marianne brought up a good point that it's kind of important to determine what it is causing the root rot. So for example, if it's Phytophthora, you might want to improve the drainage so that less standing water is at the tree. But if it's armillaria, it might be a different approach. So if someone is concerned about a root rot in their tree, they can submit samples to WSU or Oregon State University. They have disease clinics and they can help troubleshoot what's going on with their tree. I think Davy Tree Care and maybe Bartlett Tree Care can also do these kind of sample diagnostics. And so once you know what's going on, you can make more informed decisions about how to help the tree.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question we got was about, can Douglas fir crowd out madrones? Should limited clearing of Doug firs be done to allow madrone's canopy to spread or to maximize health for madrone?
If you want to grow madrone, then yes. But that's kind of the succession. It's like madrone occupies the site first and it grows. And then once the Douglas fir are established, they can get taller and shade out the madrones. So it's really, what do you want to have on your site? Kind of a question.
I don't know if we should say yes so strongly, but probably.
I mean, the same fungus will be on Doug fir and madrone on the mycorrhizal network. And they actually help the Douglas fir get established after a fire with the madrone stumps that are there that have burned and then resprouting. Those root systems are alive, so they can share mycorrhizae and allow the Douglas fir seedlings to get established. I think that's been, written about. But the question, should Douglas fir be cleared to allow madrones to grow? If you want madrones and you don't want Douglas fir, then yes.
I think if you have laminated root rot and just killing all your Dougs, and then you plant a bunch of madrones, they'll be okay.
Yeah.
They'd be fine, but not if it's armillaria.
No, if you've got armillaria, it's going to kill everything eventually.
Yeah. That's what the ultimate predator.
Another reminder to get the soil tested or get the samples tested so you know what you got. All right. So next question, Dr. Ribeiro on Bainbridge Island mixes up some concoction that he uses to cure madrone from leaf blight. And I have also heard of something along these lines, like a DIY sort of concoction one of our GSP forest stewards has used, which she just collects nettle, lets it marinate. She's professed that it will cure the spots as well. So I don't know. I don't know what this concoction is that he concocts, but I don't know.
I wonder if that's just code word for fungicide.
Yeah, I mean, there's probably some nettle perhaps has some antimicrobial properties or something. I don't know.
It'd be interesting to do some research on that. Or, compost tea is another thing that people use, but every batch is different unless you're really careful about using the same stuff to make the compost. But I've heard that people have used that to treat their plants.
I've always meant to grab some nettle and try this out on some spotty plants, but I just never have. Maybe we should get in touch. I think we know his number. Maybe we'll ask him.
There's probably some chemicals out there, whether they're produced naturally or not, that would be effective, but it's not going to cure the plant. It's just going to treat the symptoms essentially, or it'll keep the leaves healthy for a certain amount of time, and then you have to reapply because the fungus is essentially everywhere in the environment or everywhere that madrones are growing, and so your tree's going to be under a lot of pressure unless you could give it to your neighbors to apply it, and then broader and broader until every tree has this application.
Apply it with a helicopter, right, or something. But one way you can keep leaf blight from getting really severe is to open up the canopy and reduce humidity. If a tree is like next to a building that's reflecting heat, it's going to have a lot less leaf blight than one in the middle of a closed canopy forest. So just, allowing better air circulation and lower moisture conditions will help a lot.
Yeah, it probably also depends how close it is to another infected tree and things like that.
Yeah.
So if it's out there on its own, it might have less inoculum pressure, less spores floating around that could contaminate it, essentially. I do want to mention that Dr. Ribeiro honestly literally wrote a book on Phytophthora, and I'm touching it right now. And so he would be good to reach out to because he knows so much about mycology and pathogens and plant pathogens. But I also wonder if maybe he's approaching this from the traditional agriculture plant pathology field, where you try and control diseases rather than from like an ecological perspective of like what's sustainable and what can we actually do in a landscape to control. And yeah, if it's just someone who wants to keep the madrone in their front yard looking nice, then it might be feasible to apply some chemicals or some product to keep it looking healthy. But to actually do this in a landscape or on a bigger picture is probably not feasible unless we have helicopter.
Yeah, helicopter. No, it's not going to happen. So in the greenhouse, we've been using, not we, but the green thumb leader. He's been using Heritage. Have y'all heard of that fungicide?
Yeah. What's the active ingredient? I forgot.
Let me find it. Hold on a sec. As far as he can tell, that's the way to get it through and get it healthy and out the door. So the active ingredient on Heritage is azoxystrobin.
Oh, okay.
Does that sound right?
Azoxystrobin.
Azoxystrobin.
Yes.
Sounds like a killer or a winner.
It works on Phytophthora too.
Does it? Okay. All right. Yep. That's what we're using for now. It's very expensive from what I hear.
Could someone, so it's too expensive to pour like in the soil around your
via helicopter.
Yeah. There's, we still need to do a lot of research on what's driving the leaf blight and which species are there, because Marianne, do we know if it's something that's latent in like an endophyte that just pops its head out once conditions are right? Or is it something that, there's so many different things on these leaves too, that it's hard to even pinpoint which one it is. But we do have the technology to do it. We just don't really have the funding to pay for the sequencing and a lab technician to help and all of that stuff.
And it's the time to do it. That's the biggest thing for, But we have some likely culprits for the leaf blight. There are a couple of fungi that we know will cause it, but it seems like depending on the environmental conditions, one will be more prevalent in certain years, and then another one will dominate in a different time. There's one, Physidiopicnus. This is one that causes spoilage on apples in cold storage. So this is triggered by cold temperatures. And we found it on madrone in 2011 in particular, when leaf blight was really severe. We had a very cold winter, and that fungus was everywhere. So we just need to understand more about the fungal community in the foliage and what conditions makes them become aggressive pathogens.
Yeah, I was just thinking that an experiment you could do with the stock that you have, Michael, is, if you plant one that has treated with the Heritage solution, and then maybe not one, but like 10 or 100 that are treated with it and 100 that are not treated with it. And then a year later, go and look and see how the leaves look and see if there's a difference.
Well, we want to look at fungicides, maybe do a study and see which ones are effective on the madrone, on the leaf blight, and so forth. That'd be good information too.
All right. Okay. Last question, I think, and this kind of a segue into control of some of these blighted twigs and branches. Is any recommendations on trimming maintenance? And then there's kind of a follow-up question about this. Can there be some small pruning on smaller branches, and how you might go about that?
Well, I'll answer it. I think pruning can be a good idea. It's good. Yeah, smaller branches is fine. The bigger the branch that you prune, the more the tree is going to have to work to callus that over and close it off so it doesn't get decay fungi or canker fungi coming in there. But some pruning to get rid of disease like the branch dieback, the really sooty looking stuff, or anything like that, dead branches, is probably a good idea. But just think that the bigger ones, it's going to take more for the tree to compartmentalize it.
I think there's recently, Washington State University produced a video. It's an integrated pest management video about pruning. And I'm not sure if it's on YouTube, but I think it's available. So people interested in pruning, there are a lot of resources that explain how and the best practices around that for managing pests and diseases.
Okay, cool. Yeah, if you could send me that link, I can put it in the show notes so people have access to it. All right. I think that's a wrap on questions. That's enough. Those are some of the standard questions we always get, and then there's some novel ones in there. So it really helps us, I think, for the next workshop or webinar that we give, that we can come prepared. So yeah, I appreciate your all's time. It's really good to get the Army together again. And we're not the only ones. We're out there. People are out there. How many people would you say we are strong these days? There's not really quote unquote membership, so it's really hard to know.
Well, our newsletter, I think it goes out to, I want to say 300, maybe.
Right.
Something like that.
Yeah, that's pretty strong. Do you, Michael, know how many people watch the webinar?
I don't know. There's about 160 some odd people on there at some point in time. And then...
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was good. And then I think we promoted it pretty hard. And then the YouTube's up there. So it's kind of there in perpetuity for a while.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So we're getting the word out there. Definitely, folks, if you're listening from other parts of the range, we are pretty much Puyallup, Tacoma, Seattle centric. So hopefully people can join us from all portions of the range.
Well, that's what I was going to say. In your webinar, there's questions from people in Vancouver and Canada. And so anyone that is interested in Arbutus in general, or specifically Arbutus menziesii, can join the Army.
Well, it was good to have you on Tree Hugger Podcast finally.
I'm very honored to be here with you both, and I really like being a part of the Army, and you both done an incredible job, and it's really lovely to be a part. So thank you. And thanks for featuring us on this podcast and giving me an opportunity to participate.
Of course. All right. Well, we'll see y'all next time. Thanks for finding Tree Hugger Podcast again and listening into these discussions about my favorite tree with the Arbutus Army. You can find out more about us and our work at arbutusarme.org and in the show notes at treehuggerpod.com. Please take the listener survey if you can. One can find the link right now in the show description in your app, the Tree Hugger website, or the Tree Hugger Instagram profile. There are just a few questions about preferred length of the episodes, where you found me, your desires, and what you might hate about the show. That's it, and if you submit something and drop me your mailing address, I will send you a Tree Hugger sticker. If you opened up the survey when I first started talking about it, you would probably be done by now. Again, thanks for joining me for another episode. I'm Michael Yadrick. We are on social media at TreeHuggerPod, so feel free to point people in our direction. Subscribe, rate, and review the show, please, on whichever podcast platform you enjoy listening to. It helps people find the show. And please tell a friend about the show. You can donate to the show now, too. At the Tree Hugger website, there's a PayPal link. If you're in the position to donate some funds, it would help to offset some of the show's costs. Thanks for considering. Music for this show was from Chris Hagen and Demanche. Thanks for hanging out. Que viven los madrones.